Northern Hemisphere may be aware that the winter solstice officially was last night at 11:19 p.m. Now, I certainly hope at 11:19 p.m. last night you were all partying and celebrating the winter solstice. Did you even know that it was the winter solstice? And what that means is that both yesterday and today, we will only experience 9 hours and 13 minutes of daylight out of 24 hours. The shortest day, the longest night of the year. The solstice, a word that's derived from Latin, which literally means the sun stands still, marks that time when the rays of the sun, when the light is furthest away. And for several days at this particular time of the year, it appears that life, at least in the heavens, has stopped in place. It's something that people throughout history have noticed. And then the light will slowly return. People of Israel who were facing exile knew that that would be a life filled with spiritual and emotional darkness, because they would be scattered throughout the empire of the Assyrians. Their sense of community would be wiped out. They would be disconnected from their beloved temple, and eventually it would be destroyed. The political alliances that they had made, that they thought would keep them safe, were in ruins. And their image of God was shattered. It seemed like a land of darkness. It seemed to them like the light was as far away as it possibly could be. It seemed that life had stood still for them. They had long understood God as being their protector of the life as they desired it and defined it, rather than living life as God had intended and had given them the vision. Exile would mean the death of the image of God as the protector of their images. And there was no clear notion of what was going to come. Here was a nation crying out to God for life. And they would walk in darkness, but it was into this setting that the prophet Isaiah brought them the word declaring the coming hope of a new light, a light that would shine in the darkness. It was through this anointed one that they would come to light the darkness, and a new way of life would emerge. Now, scholars will point out that there was no thought at the time of the prophecy of Isaiah that Jesus of Nazareth, born in Bethlehem, some 6+ centuries later, would be the fulfillment of that. They were looking for something more immediate, and they did receive immediate relief. But early Christians who were fully familiar with the prophecies of Isaiah saw in this prophecy that in Jesus, God was fulfilling the promise that even if the prophecy was referring to an earlier hope, God had done it again. And in Jesus, there would be no need for a future Messiah, because this was the light that would shine in the darkness that would never go out. Remember what life was like at the time of Jesus' birth. They weren't facing exile, but it wasn't a place of joy. It wasn't a place of life. Israel was occupied territory. And so the people had to carefully balance their commitment to God, yet they were under that ever-present Roman subjugation of their land, which meant they were pressured to worship the emperor. Like the Hebrew people who were facing exile, people of the first century in Israel felt that they too were living in a land of deep darkness. And while there was a rich religious tradition, many lived separated from that meaningful, life-giving connection with God, because everything went through the priestly system. They longed for light, to experience abundant life. They were hoping for peace with justice and righteousness. They were longing for the right to self-determination. They needed life, abundant in freedom and hope, love and peace. But for many it was not an abundant life. They were mired in spiritual darkness. And they longed for a Savior. They longed for God's Messiah. Their longing, however, was going to be a Messiah who would change everything through political persuasion, military maneuvering and might, and economic self-determination. What they didn't look for was an unassuming, poor tradesman from an insignificant village in Galilee. They didn't look for one who would challenge them to turn the other cheek, to walk the second mile, to lift up the poor, to eat with sinners, and touch the untouchable. But this is what God did. This was what God's chosen Messiah focused on. And because of his influence and his teaching, the world has been a different place from that moment on. We don't know a world any different, but imagine what our world would have been like had there been no Jesus Christ. It sounds a little bit like Frank Capra's 1946 film, It's a Wonderful Life. In it, George Bailey, who's played by Jimmy Stewart, finds many of his hopes and dreams devastated by life circumstances that were pretty much beyond his control. The near death of his brother that caused George to go deaf in one ear. The death of his father. Bank failures of 1929 and a misplacing of a large amount of cash from his business that brought George to a moment of despair. Life seemed to be getting worse and worse for George Bailey until he finds himself in what he considered the darkest moment of his life. And he wished he had never been born. He felt his life was nothing but darkness. That is until Clarence, the angel, second class, came into his life. Now, I don't know who decided that the name Clarence for an angel was a good one. But I kind of like it. You know, the Gabriels and all that, you know, they're overused. You know, Clarence, I don't know, Greta. We could certainly come up with names. But Clarence comes and grants him his wish temporarily. And what he finds is that everything that he treasured and valued, his family, his friends, his neighbors, the people he had helped, who had been rejected by others, and even those he had rescued along their life journey, all of them were gone. All of it was missing. And he finds himself in a moment of even darker despair as we pick up on his life, where he is praying and pleading to get his life back, to really live, not as someone else believes he should, but to live an authentic life.
Henry Clarence, please. Please. I want to live again. I want to live again. I want to live again. Please, God, let me live again. Hey, George! George! You all right? Hey, what's the matter? Now get out of here, Bert, or I'll hit you again. Get out! What the Sam Hill you yelling for, George? George? Bert, do you know me? Know you? Huh. You kidding? I've been looking all over town trying to find you. I saw your car piled into that tree down there, and I thought maybe you... Hey, your mouth's bleeding. Are you sure you're all right? What you... My mouth's bleeding, Bert! My mouth's bleeding! Doo-doo pedals! Doo-doo! There they are! Bert! What do you know about that? Merry Christmas!
I want to live. I want to live. That's the same question, or the same statement that was made by the Hebrew people yearning centuries earlier. It's the same question and the same statement that we look for when we seek to find the Messiah in our lives. We want to live. We're looking for a life of meaning, of significance, not because of big achievements, but significant because of the way in which light shines through us and brightens the world, not just for us, but for others around us. This is what God had planned. George saw the consequences of life without him, and it wasn't pretty. Living was meaningful because of the relationships that were built, the caring, the serving, the risking self for the sake of others. And though George Bailey nor Clarence were a Messiah, George had reflected on the essence of what abundant life was. For a brief moment, he had fallen into despair of a temporary setback. And that happens to us too. We have moments where we fall into those times of despair and we wonder, what's it worth? And we don't necessarily see the light, but the light is always shining. There is always light out there, and we are people who, though we may find ourselves at times living in darkness, we can see a great light. And light is for us. As Isaiah said, that his life unto us. Not unto them, not to somebody else, but to us, to all of us. A child is born. Unto us a son is given. We're nearing the end of the Advent season. And we've been focusing over the last few weeks on why did Christ come in the first place. And we can go to the very words of Jesus in the Gospel of John. I came that you may have life and have it abundantly. This Christmas, we can choose life. Any darkness that we may feel, we are invited to walk out of that, knowing that we will be led and we will be guided by a light of Christ. Any place where we may feel that maybe we're lost along the way, there is that light in the distance that we can see where it is we need to go. If things are looking great this season, we can be thankful that we have abundant life. For Christ came into the world that we may have life, and we may have it with abundance. And anything that stands in the way, God is there to help break down those barriers, to help show us that straight path towards an abundant and a wonderful